But if you have this kind of information at your fingertips, and you can show it in a meeting and see what happens when you change various plans or maybe move a boundary just a couple kilometers, it lowers the temperature and makes the options much more palatable.
Thank you very much. And now turning to Adriano. Adriano, we know that you have been leading this Blue Azores project, which is a global benchmark in terms of participation and governance as far as the ocean use. So, what are the lessons that you can bring to us in terms of island MSP-based frameworks? How this can be applied for continental countries such as Brazil, such as Australia?
Thank you very much for the question. Um, I truly believe that the scale is not the issue here, because if the methodology it can be applied in another region, so it doesn't matter if it's an archipelagic region, if it's small or big. The fact is that if we have a clear pathway in terms of the stakeholder engagement process, that thing that Will was saying, by incorporating local knowledge and actually making changes to the plan according to the people's wishes and expectations, what you are doing actually is creating ownership of the plan in the end. And by doing that, you can be sure that your conflicts in the end and the people will be much more easily adopting the plan if they see themselves, their options, their draws on the final map. So I would say that the main Blue Azores lesson learned was, if you engage people since the beginning, since acquiring data, incorporating local knowledge into the plan and discussing everything with stakeholders, you create this sense of ownership, and then that will make your life much easier in the end. One thing regarding offshore wind farms and wind energy, what I would like to see is by trying to solve a problem to create another one bigger. What I'm trying to say is that I give you the example of plastic. Plastic was created in the 19th century to solve an environmental problem, right? So backlight was discovered because they wanted to substitute polar billiard balls made by marble from elephants. So they created plastic. And that created a problem even bigger than the problem they were trying to solve. I'm not saying that we are doing that with wind farm. I'm just saying that in order to don't do that, we need to understand that the ocean health is not negotiable. We need to, the MSP has that specific goal to choose the potential areas to place wind farms. And we need to do, and we need to develop these activities in a way that does not jeopardize ocean health, because this is fundamental for our common future.
Thank you very much, Adriano. Yes, co-designing and early engagement is really critical on the process to develop offshore wind. And another topic tied to that is just transition associated to offshore wind and to marine spatial planning. So I would like to hear from you, Dora, about how can marine spatial planning process ensure that indigenous people, communities, small-scale fishers, and the coastal communities are not only consulted, but they are part of the process. They are really, engaged in co-designing this energy transition by offshore wind.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation and for the invitation as well. I think this is key to avoid new damage, process. And I would like to bring three perspectives here. When we think about people living in the coastal areas, in the marine areas, and the way that this has been threatened by new investments that are not considering the protection of the oceans, but also the protection of people living nearby and surviving for generations in a very sustainable way. We have to think about three main points. First, do these people have rights? Are there specific legislation at national, regional, or international levels that protect them? Can we bring international human rights framework to translate into what their needs are, or do we need to build new legal frameworks to respond to certain situations that are very specific? This is a key question, and this is something that has been informed all the developments of different social groups, and I can give you 3 examples. For example, when we think about women, 30 years ago, there was no domestic violence act in any country of the world. Today we have 189 countries with gender-based violence legislation. It was necessary to develop new frameworks to deal with a specific issue. So this is a very serious question that in reviewing several documents, sometimes I, as a lawyer with this kind of a background, I keep in doubt. I keep thinking, is this enough to protect people, or do we need to discuss in these moments and at regional and international levels some new framework to protect? The second question is, if there is enough legislation to protect, if there is enough rights that cover all the needs, do they know about that? Are they able to engage in campaigns, in strategic litigation, in demanding from their governments at subnational levels, local level, but at federal level, that they do have rights and these should be protected? This is a main issue, and we can think about the thousands of experiences of legal empowerment all over the world with peasants, with indigenous groups, with domestic workers, with other people, and this is something that needs to be done on a regular basis, mostly by civil society itself, but with the support of intergovernmental agencies, and which can lead to another level of accountability, transparency in this process. And third, do the governments know that these people have rights? Are they able to respond in a very adequate form to this? Are there mechanisms that are possible to be reached to make governments accountable, make sure that they are enforcing the legislation, the rights? So I think when we consider all these elements, then we can think about just transitions, because it's a process that incorporates all the needs, engage people who know that they are active actors in this process, that they do have rights, that they can have protection if they need, and also a process that governments are aware about their responsibilities and their obligations. And I think we are in a moment where this is reached another level with the advisory opinions from the Inter-American Human Rights Court and the International Court of Justice, where the opinions say governments are responsible, including for the marine areas. So there is very little about it in specific terms, but it's there. So it's something that we can bring to the table and to the conversation.
Yes, and I think this reminds me of the process that we are going through right now in Brazil, because we are just about regulating the sector of offshore wind in Brazil. So there is a lot of legal processes going on, a lot of public hearings and consultations being done, and we need to make sure that these consultations are being extended to the communities. Otherwise, they keep, siloed in very small groups in the industry, and we are not able to reach, communities and indigenous people that are affected by offshore wind.
If you allow me to make a footnote on that, usually legislation that are not known by people, they are very much not effective. They are not effective because if people don't incorporate the rights and the norms and the regulations that are there and see themselves as part of this, that's what we call in Brazil, it doesn't work, you know. It's some legislation that is bureaucratic, not grounded in real life.
Yeah, not reaching affected people. Yeah, we need transparency. Now turning to you, Gavin. So I would like to explore a nature positive around offshore wind. So I would like you to explore the Australian experience and tell us what policies and approaches that ensure that offshore wind results in nature positive development.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a real challenge for us. I run the climate program for Australia's largest and most established environmental organisation, and it's my job to make sure that renewable energy is hitting the grid as fast as possible. And Australia's had astonishing growth in renewable energy in the last 10 years, but it can't come while destroying nature. And this has been a really concerted challenge for us, both for biodiversity protection and for social licence. One of the things, a few of the things we do, we work with offshore wind operators to make sure that they comply with the global biodiversity framework. So they're lifting the standards of the way that they do their construction in offshore wind developments around the country, all the way from construction to decommissioning. We worked with the government, the Australian government, to set up an offshore infrastructure regulator that ensures that the offshore wind industry is now complying with Australia's stringent national environmental laws, and all our offshore wind is federal jurisdiction. It's quite a fair way offshore. And finally, and many people here and in the audience would just see the range of engineering and technological advances that have occurred to reduce the environmental impact of offshore wind, and we can rattle them off. I mean, I've seen projects where now artificial intelligence is used to detect bird migrations and then adjust the velocity of wind turbines. Changing the height of wind turbines has had a significant impact. Putting stripes on wind turbine propellers has actually significantly reduced bird strikes amongst many of our most critical endangered bird species. Bubble curtains during construction, the creation of underwater artificial reef ecosystems. I mean, the list goes on. So, I mean, we've had, as with any industry, particularly newer industries, and we've historically had a lot of uptake of solar. Wind's been more recent, and it's just been a matter of, you know, it's an industry where, as always, there are companies that are leading Australia and the world in their design and application of offshore wind, and there are cowboys in the industry. So it's our role just to lift the standard of performance to protect nature across that industry, to ensure that it protects nature and maintains its social licence over time.
Thank you very much, Gavin. And now, Elbia, I would like to hear from you. You have this experience now working as a energy envoy for COP30. And I know that there is a lot of intersection in the agenda between energy and just transition. So how do you think that COP30 will be able to advance, in the context of climate, energy transition, and also the just and equitable transition?
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everybody, for opportunity. I'd like to say hello for my colleagues in the name of my friend, Spatial Planning. She is here, Denise Dora. She always talking about the transition and just transition, and we learning all the time. It's so nice to stay with you. So the first point is about the context of climate change. We know that we are changing our economic model. We are creating a new economic model, and we need to understand that the planet has a limit, society has a limit, and you cannot advance this limit. There are a very strong limit that we need to respect. I don't know how, but until now, we develop an economy, always think about increase GDP without to look for society in the right way. Then there is no possibility to do this. If you are creating new base for economy It's necessary to create basis for society, for the planet. It's a limit. If it is limited, we need to understand that we are going, it's not for only energy transition. We are not only leaving the fossil fuel production to go to renewable, I don't know what's happening, maybe, I don't know, or from fossil fuel to renewable, but we need to leave this place and with society we arrive there in a big transformation process. I used to say that we are not going for energy transition, but for energy transformation, because it's important to take opportunity to change economy, to change society. You need to change our mindset that you produce, that you make decision in your business. Business needs to include people, need to include just transition. The way to do this is include people and look for people, because we know that we are constructing a new model, a new economic model in order to create better conditions for us, while the society and for the planet. Then we need to go together. So I think it is in COP. We are here in the eighth day today. With this discussion, I'm so happy because I can see this in every place that I have been discussing this subject, this issue. Everybody has this is so clear. Then we can see in negotiation process that the countries has been making negotiation process. Just energy is a concept that started to embed in discussion. Then it's making me happy. We need to take care, then I believe that we have responsibility because we know, we understand this process. We need to insist in this concept. For me, it's very easy. If we are doing energy transition, of course, we are doing energy transformation and the people is included. But we need to repeat all the time and create this concept in companies, because the productive sector will make investment. They will create conditions for investments. They need to have this in a strategy. It cannot be only energy transition with investments, with return tax. It's necessary to include this in business model, understand that the energy transition is a business, is a very good business, and this energy transition process, or as I'd prefer to say, energy transformation is our opportunity while society, while policymakers or people that influence decision, that is an opportunity to make a big transformation in our society when included this society.
Thank you very much, Elbia. And just taking on what you're talking about, energy transition in a more broad way. But when you look at offshore wind energy, how do you see the just transition being embedded in the process of offshore wind? And I just want to ask if you have any hint on when a potential auction would occur here in Brazil.
Yeah, this is very interesting because it's this kind of model that can born with this concept, because offshore wind is a very new technology. The world started to invest in wind offshore about 5-6 years ago. And the country that has been doing these investments, like European country and now China, they learned in this process. This is a learning by doing process. Then now in Brazil, when we started to create conditions for this, prepare our law that we have law now, and right now we are discussing regulatory framework, we learn with other countries how to do this and learning what not to do. Then it's very important, and we know that how these countries face a problem with people. because did it included people when process started. It's necessary to make people part of the process. Companies need to show the program. It's something that happened before investments, but it's important the framework, the legal framework and the regulatory framework have some obligations in this. Our process for environment agency, IBAMA, they are a very important social obligation. But I believe that we, companies that we invest, we need to create more obligation, more process that includes society, because it can avoid the risk in the future. It can guarantee our projects that we are learning, we starting the process in the right way.
Yeah, and I think that the moment is very interesting because since we are approaching an auction, I think embedding the auction process of not just, asking developers to offer based on price criteria, embedding the process with other, outcomes, non-price criteria that can bring nature, that can bring communities, to the game. I think it helps a lot to make it institutional process of offshore wind develop that respects people and respects the environment. So I'm going into the second round and going back to Will. And since we are talking about auctions, I would like you to explore, well, how marine spatial planning can help, can support on offshore wind auctions, and what practical steps can MSP take, in the next year to make sure that trade-offs are addressed before the leasing, reducing conflict, delays, and social resistance?
Right. So I think that if you wait until after the auctions to deal with trade-offs, basically you're just setting yourself up for damage control. You're not really doing planning. So there's some concrete things that you can do with MSP teams before leasing that dramatically lower that conflict, and which leads to basically delay. So first, separate planning from auctions in time and mindset. You can use MSP to define a few things up front, like no-go areas for biodiversity and indigenous use or cultural use. You can prioritize areas for conservation. You can set, high potential areas for wind where conflicts are manageable, probably not zero. And then you publish those as planning products, not as like marketing materials, right? The signal is those zones reflect our national choices, but not what the last company has just proposed. So second, you build your social maps using a process like I mentioned before. Ocean use surveys is something that's going on in Brazil, and you're mapping the values of where people go and how they value that space for navigation, livelihood, sacred sites, and so on. And that helps you identify those areas that are at high risk of conflict with your wind farm, and places that are medium-low. And that basically just gives the ministry the opportunity to say, we're auctioning in areas where we already know are lower risk, and there's concrete evidence for that, right? Third, you can agree on rules of the game with criteria that are co-designed with fishers, stakeholders, indigenous organizations, local governments, and so on, before the game starts, right? So the rules of the game would include siting criteria, quantitative thresholds, for example, overlapping with high-value fishing grounds, and so on. Maybe a cumulative impact framework that helps you identify what places, based on what we know is there and what's going on right now, what additional impacts a wind farm would have. And then you put all that in writing, right, before the planning starts or the auction starts. And then you stress test those auction areas with all the people who might scream about it later, right? Everybody's at the table with tools that allow them to draw proposed auction blocks on a map, show in real time reports that show which fleets, which communities, what habitats are affected, and then allow people to make adjustments, shift borders, and explore the various options. And so, yeah, if you do all those things, define no-go and preferred areas, build social maps, set transparent siting rules, stress test the auction areas with real people, then it becomes a process of negotiation and not just a fight.
Yeah, interesting. So there is a lot of information that MSP can offer to governments before we really start to plan the auction. And a successful auction depends in a large extent on having information, accurate information embedded in the MSP, right?
That's right, and I don't want that to sound like an overwhelming thing that is going to significantly delay your process. It's not so. Doing those kinds of ocean use surveys can be fairly rapid, even in a place as large as Brazil. And there is a lot of really good information already out there on of the sort that you need to do these kinds of trade-offs.
Thank you. Well, Adriano, could you connect, MSP experience and how they can help to advance global climate goals such as the blue NDCs and how important they will be in the run-up to COP31?
Yeah, I think that we are in the stage of implementation, right? And we need to be accountable for the things that we have done, and we need to prove that they work. Otherwise, we need to change something. That's why we have the adaptive management concept. It's not just the concept, as we spoke in the other event. I think it's something that it needs to be fast. Planning should be fast, should be flexible. You can count with controversy. You can count with disagreement. I never been in the planning process where there was no disagreement in the end. So this means that something is being done right, if there is a disagreement in the end, because the stakeholder engagement process it's a process that nobody gets everything what they wanted, but everybody gets something. I think now for the COP31 we need to prove that our tools work, and we need to account for the quantitatively what were the benefits that it were created. I think this is the main message here. In terms of the Blue Azores program and the stakeholder the marine protected areas, now is the time we need to show stakeholders that these marine protected areas work or not. And actually our approach there was not just to think about MPAs specifically in one place, but to think in a network that could provide benefits for the entire maritime space of the Azores. And I think that's what you can call the sustainable ocean plan. You need to actually incorporate these two processes together, MSP and marine protected areas, in a way that you can develop activities that are in line with the ecosystem services and can support the activities, that the ecosystems can support the activities and at the same time can remain resilient and healthy. That's the 101 concept of sustainable ocean planning. This is what we need to do, I think.
Thank you, Adriano. And Denise, now understanding this transition, what are the safeguards that governments need to put in place in order to contribute to a just energy transition that is not exacerbating existing inequalities and really changing into a different model that brings everyone together?
Oh, this is quite a dream. But actually the idea of incorporating just in the discussions about transition was a step itself. To introduce the idea of we need to do this with justice. And what kind of justice? Social justice, economic justice, and climate justice, which means to bring people first to identify that in climate emergencies and climate crises, people who suffer the most are the ones that are already vulnerable to these situations. All the data shows that women and girls are the ones who are receiving less attention in protection and therefore are the ones who are being more harmed by climate crisis. So you need to look into structural discriminations, inequalities, and make sure that every time you think about a transition, an energy transition, you see governments are, and also companies. I think Elba is my colleague in this adventure. Elba has also mentioned this. Not only governments, but also the companies, the business sector needs to look and see, in doing this, would we exacerbate the level of inequalities that are already there, or this brings solutions that allows to make a transition that is fair, that it doesn't increase inequality, on the contrary, is able to decrease inequalities and are based in local solutions. So one of the remedies to do this is to look what the communities itself, what the groups that are being affected by the crisis and they will be engaged in the transitions, what they say. When you mentioned in your first question about the consent, the idea of applying the ILO Convention 169 on the free and informed consent to not only indigenous and tribal communities, but also all the communities involved in the energy transition projects, it means that they know what's going on and they have a voice on it. In doing this work as a special envoys, we have traveled through the Brazil in the 6 biomes, and we will have the 7th, the oceans, with Marine very soon. And what we heard is that for this problem, we do have some proposals for making a transition that it's just for us and for the planet. But we don't have a place to say this. So we need to improve channels of participation. This is really key. It's clear that there is a need for that. We need to have spaces where governments and the business sector listen to this and consider this. But I also think that we need to have the academic and scientific community engaged in listen traditional knowledge, traditional practices, and then understand what's going there as a science that would help us to make this transition in a very fair way. So not only consider people, but consider also the knowledge accumulated over generations in dealing with nature, and in being part of nature is a very important part of it.
Yes, I think you brought two very interesting points. One is adding this indigenous knowledge to the process, and also it relates from our conversation yesterday, and we'll deliver the speech talking about what prosperity do we want, right? What does it mean? Means this prosperity associated to the energy transition, right? And I think it has a lot to do with this very deep thinking, and I think we are very much responsible for that as activists in the climate change agenda, to really think how we can transform a prosperity that is not bringing economic development, but is bringing communities along, that is bringing a shared value to everyone. And now, Gavin, I want to hear from you the role of NGOs, the role of the civil society, and I would like you to answer how can NGOs, civil society groups help to strengthen transparency, social license, and community trust within the Marine Spatial Planning and the offshore wind development process?
I mean, a lot of it for us is just the bread and butter work that NGOs always do around community consultation. So digital campaigns into local communities, town hall meetings, stalls, all those kind of community outreach activities that we do every day to lift community literacy. But we actually faced a significant challenge in Australia when it came to offshore wind. We're very used to climate denial campaigns in Australia to slow climate action. But in particular, since the anti-vaccination campaigns during the COVID crisis, we saw a dramatic increase in disinformation campaigns being waged by the fossil fuel industry and by the far right of politics in Australia to slow the renewable energy build, and in particular the offshore wind energy build. And communities were being told, frankly, extraordinary stories about these impacts. Hundreds of dead whales would be on their beaches, thousands of birds the wiping out of entire migratory bird species, electromagnetic impacts on the health of communities and biodiversity. And so we really had to go back to basics with our communications campaigns to make sure that we were inoculating those communities from those impacts. And what we learned, really two big things, is to get into those communities really early with public education campaigns, which kind of, as I said, inoculated a lot of those disinformation campaigns that we were seeing hit those communities, and running a whole range of community consultation processes to lift community literacy in that space. The second thing that we found that we had to do was really re-establish why we were doing the renewable energy build in the first place, and which of course is about the need to transition away from coal and gas, whether you care about climate change or not. Australia's coal-fired power station infrastructure was heading end of life, and we needed to make this transition anyway. But also bring those communities along in terms of what climate action looked like. Offshore wind construction is about climate action, and so really establishing with communities why this build was required and why their communities were part of the clean energy transition in Australia, and make it something that communities were proud of rather than resisting at the local level. We also, as part of that, with the federal government, established an offshore infrastructure commissioner to lift that public literacy to government level, and reaching out to communities, Indigenous communities, multicultural communities, and the Australian community as a whole, to make sure that there was just a much higher level of literacy about the impacts of these projects. And we had the benefit of really having 6 renewable energy offshore wind energy zones that we could focus on to concentrate those campaigns.
Yes, disinformation, it's a shared challenge that we have here in Brazil as well. And SOEP, we've been tackling via a technical assistance project that we are developing in the northeast of Brazil. And we believe that the results will be quite interesting, because it's not only, disinformation, but also lack of knowledge, because they hear about a new industry that will come, and they are not really informed about that. For example, here in Brazil, they have received maps from the environmental agency with not projects that will actually be developed, but projects that are, that have been planned by several developers, but they are not really have been evaluated by the agencies, and that creates a lot of disinformation and a lot of a wrong understanding, wrong perception, because some projects are very close to the coast, some projects are, overlaying areas that they are fishing. So I think tackling this and inoculating proper message, bursting myths, it's very important in this process, and it's a challenge also here in Brazil. So I think we are almost running out of time. We still have a question for Elbia, and the question I have for you, Elbia, is more related to the outcomes of COP30. So if you could expect one very good outcome as far as offshore wind for COP30, what that would be?
I have been working with the Brazilian government for relaunching so fast as possible or schedule for our first public offer. We need to have our first public offer, that the offer will create conditions for investors, study areas, including environment studies. Then we cannot wait for this, because the world has been investing in offshore wind. Brazil needs to launch in this process, or the money go for other places. Then I had insisted with government that we needed to launch schedule, this data for our public offer. We expect that this public offer will be in the next year, and we are working for this, and I believe that we'll have this in the next year.
Oh, that's good news for us too. And we are having high expectations in this auction. So just to wrap up, I'll comment on the manifesto that Elbia is being the ambassador of this manifesto on how to accelerate offshore wind here in Brazil. We are laying out 10 recommendations on how we can advance in this agenda. I think we are going to share here with all of you. I want to also take this time to really say about my appreciation of your time, your insights, your valuable comments for being here. And I hope to see you again soon at COP31. Thank you very much.
Okay.